welcome to the webinar, Best Practices in Dyslexia Assessment with Dr. Nancy Mather. My name is Stephanie Roberts, Business Development Manager with WPS. This is the second webinar in a series of 3 webinars. During the previous webinar, Dr. Mather reviewed dyslexia and its impact on reading, spelling, and self-esteem. In December, we will be hosting a webinar with Dr. Mather where she will cover challenges in dyslexia assessment. This current webinar will address best practices in dyslexia assessment. When we develop a new test, we do bring an author's idea to life, answer a researcher's question, meet a clinician's need, and ideally change an individual's life for the better. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Mather. Dr. Mather is a professor emerita at the University of Arizona in Tucson and co-author of several assessments, including the Tests of Dyslexia and the Woodcock-Johnson 4 Tests of Achievement. She has served as a learning disabilities teacher, diagnostician, and educational consultant, and she conducts workshops on both assessment and instruction for students with dyslexia. She received her PhD in special education from the University of Arizona with a dissertation focused on the assessment of gifted students and students with learning disabilities. Throughout her career, Dr. Mather has maintained a special focus on assessment and intervention for individuals with dyslexia and learning disabilities. In particular, her research and scholarship have centered on assessment methods and interventions for children with reading problems. Her articles have appeared in both school psychology and special education journals, and she has published numerous books on topics related to learning disabilities and dyslexia, including Essentials of Dyslexia Assessment and Intervention, Learning Disabilities and Challenging Behaviors, and Essentials of Assessment Report Writing. In addition to the Todd and WJ4, Dr. Mather is co-author of the Test of Silent Word Reading Fluency, 2nd edition, the Test of Orthographic Competence, 2nd edition, and the Illinois Test of Psycholinguistic Abilities, 3rd edition. Welcome, Dr. Mather.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. You're making me tired. Anyway, it's so nice to be here with you. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, and we have beautiful sunsets here. I'm just going to show you a couple Arizona pictures, but we have these like amazing sunsets here. But I was out playing golf the other day. I thought this is pretty funny. Look at this. I mean, golf in Arizona, huh? It's like, oh my gosh. Anyway, where you live, you probably don't see signs like this. So not too long ago, I looked out and there was a bobcat at the pool. And I thought, well, that's pretty funny. And then what was funnier was he had a bobcat pool party. And so, look at this. It looks like there's social distancing, doesn't it? Anyway, pretty funny. So a couple of years ago, ended up in the Maldives, which is, I know, where we'd all like to be, right now. I mean, there's just these beautiful islands, and about 70 of them have resorts on them. And, it's just fantastic. This is the honeymoon suite here. So they say in 50 years, these islands will be gone because of global warming. So they're, trying to keep the water back. But I got there because I had a friend who was working for Handicapped International out of Belgium, and he had a job to come screen the Maldivian children for disabilities. And he said, well, just come over and help a few days, would you? So anyway, so I come over. These kids, they speak English. They're, just adorable. So my job is I'm the memory tester, okay? So it's a screening test, and I'm supposed to go like 4, 1, 4, and then the child does it back. And if they can't do 3 digits, I do 2, and if they can't do 2, I do 1, and then you just record in terms of how they did. So out of about the 400 children we screened, there were probably 20 kids that really had trouble with the task. And you start thinking, why? Is it memory? Is it attention? Maybe they're afraid. I mean, they don't understand. And just kind of made me think how advanced we are with assessment in our country, where we can lots of times really figure out why a child is struggling. And then more important, really know, what should we do about it? What do we do about it? So you probably don't have javelina where you live. They're very cute, but what are we going to talk about today? So We'll just spend a second reviewing about what is dyslexia, and then we're going to spend our time talking about, what should we be assessing in a dyslexia evaluation. So dyslexia is a specific problem in the development of word reading, reading rate, and spelling. It affects the development of automaticity with sound symbol connections. It has both a brain basis and it does run in families. And it's often accompanied by specific weaknesses and linguistic risk factors that really predict you're going to have trouble learning to read and spell. And so in our first webinar, we went into in depth in terms of, understanding dyslexia. So our focus today is more on what should we be including in assessments. So strong converging evidence indicates that dyslexia has a genetic basis, but there's not one specific gene for reading. But family history is a key risk indicator. And if one parent has dyslexia, there's a 40 to 60% chance that the child will have dyslexia. So in an evaluation, you always want to ask the question, has anyone in the family had trouble learning to read? And as we all know, typically they will say yes, my father did, or I did, or my sister did. And so family history is one of the strongest risk factors for developing dyslexia. And so this is kind of a key piece of information. Having a parent who has dyslexia increases the likelihood a child will have dyslexia. If both parents have dyslexia, the probability increases even more. So the findings of a review are novel and surprisingly consistent across languages. Heightened risk of dyslexia in families in which a first-degree relative is affected. Such that children are at high risk are 4 times more likely to succumb to reading problems than peers from families with no such risk. So again, it's just very important that we always ask, has anyone in the family had trouble learning to read? So Stenger and Donahue back in 1937, said to be effective, remedial instruction in reading must be preceded by careful diagnosis. And so again, we're really trying to figure out what the child can do, where they're having trouble, and then, how do we help them? So often we begin a dyslexia evaluation looking at reading and spelling to determine there is a problem. Many times I would start out like with the pseudo word test, reading nonsense words, both timed and untimed, just to see how their phonics skills are. So let's say they have really good phonics skills. You probably can skip phonological awareness in most instances, just because, again, to read nonsense words and spell them, you've got to be able to blend and segment speech sounds. How accurately do they read? How's their reading fluency and rate? How's their spelling of regular words versus exception words or irregular words? How does their reading and spelling compare to their math and oral language abilities? So Dr. Denkla said that automaticity refers to the ability to perform tasks without actively thinking through them. And we're going to see this is a key concept about dyslexia, is this difficulty developing automaticity with reading and with spelling. So the accuracy and speed of reading, quick recognition, you don't have to use decoding strategies. It's not the same as fluency, because fluency also includes expression. And you can only have expression when you're automatic. And so I know we've all listened to kids read who just kind of have a monotone because they're not really, understanding what they're reading. So here's Josh. Josh is in 7th grade. He is reading the 2nd grade passage. I just want you to listen to him read for a minute.
Name when you start. Well, okay, it's called the Best Friends Club, okay? And you can start right here. And if you can't get a word, just do the best you can with it, okay? And then when you get to here, just turn the page and keep reading. Liz and Harold were best friends. Harold and Lizzie was how to be cats. Cabal Liz train how to play run fastest. Here, hold it up. Liz and her name on.
Okay, so when we get to share it, it's been 1 minute. It's painful to listen to him read. Imagine being in 7th grade and having, readings like this, but he read 24 words and he made 13 errors. And so words read correctly, 11 to 13. A typical 2nd grade student would be expected to read about 100 words correct per minute when reading unpracticed 2nd grade text. And so we can just see, how far behind he is. And again, being in middle school and having reading like this. So one thing I included for you in the handouts is a copy of Dr. Jan Hasbrook and Jerry Tyndall's oral reading fluency norms, in case you don't have that. But it just kind of gives you information about what to expect in 1st through 6th grade in terms of fall, winter, and spring, in terms of, oral reading fluency. And so these new norms were produced, in 2017. They originally did this study back in 2006. And what's kind of interesting when you look at the 50th percentile here in terms of, oral reading, you do see that kids are reading a little bit faster early on. But then it's kind of interesting when you get to the end of 6th grade, we see there's, really no difference in terms of, and so it kind of makes me think maybe we're pushing kids too hard to go quickly, rather than stressing accuracy more. So Dr. Hasbrook says that faster is not necessarily better. So we want kids to be reading from the 50th to the 75th percentile range on oral reading fluency norms on unpracticed grade level text. So that's our goal. And that there's limited evidence that going above the 50th to 70th percentile rank is of any benefit. So it may be kind of one area when you're the 99th percentile is not necessarily an advantage. So significant evidence exists. It's crucial to help students read with fluency solidly at or near the 50th percentile. The 70th 50th percentile is sufficient for optimizing comprehension, but the 50th percentile is necessary for comprehension. So our goal really is with our kids to get them to the 50th percentile in terms of, oral reading fluency. So one of the most difficult things for students with dyslexia, really of all ages, is spelling. This was kind of a funny little t-shirt, but it's really hard to learn to spell if you have dyslexia. And so as part of an evaluation, we always do want to look, at their spelling. So, Ethan is in 5th grade and, we look at his spelling: people, any, friend, gallon, remember, RMEBER. And then we have older students too who are really struggling with spelling. Alex is 20 years old, and this is in a community college class. And the assignment was, if you bought an essay from somebody to help you write your paper, what should you do? So he says, if I bought an essay from somebody, I would use it as a reference to make my own paper. He should have asked more questions when he started college. And so, again, we have some older students too who are just still really struggling with spelling. So as part of an evaluation for dyslexia, we want to think about linguistic risk factors. These are the factors that can affect the development of reading and spelling, and they predict you're going to struggle to learn to read and spell. Some of these abilities are more trainable than others. We do a pretty good job with phonological awareness. It seems, again, working memory is a little more difficult in terms of having an impact on improved academic performance. So some of the most important linguistic risk factors are phonological awareness, orthographic processing, rapid automatized naming, processing speed, working memory, and visual verbal paired associate learning. So just kind of go through these quickly. So Dr. Marianne Wolf and Patricia Bowers talked about what they call the double deficit hypothesis, that if you have a problem in phonological awareness or slow naming speed, you're going to have trouble learning to read. And Marianne Wolf said that the term double deficit emerged as a concrete metaphor to convey the critical blow the combination of deficits represents. So naming speed skills predicts word identification, phonological skills predicts reading nonsense words, word attack, and if you have deficits in both variables, there's no compensatory route easily available. So Dr. Badian talked about, it's more than just a double deficit, there's a triple deficit. We also have kids who have problems with orthography or orthographic processing, which we'll talk, a little bit about. So phonological processing, we'll often see early articulation errors, confusion of similar sounding sounds, history of ear infections, trouble learning letter sounds, difficulty repeating, reading, and spelling nonsense words. So this is Dr. Christopher Lee, and he has dyslexia and pretty severe phonological processing problems.
Difficulty visualizing different letters, but I also have trouble with the auditory processing aspect. And one of the things that I have difficulty with is recognizing groups of words. For example, pull, pull, and pull all come out sounding the same, and I hear them the same. And what I was saying is pull being a swimming pool, pull being like pulling something, and then a string of pulls or a pull, and they all sound the same. So it makes it very difficult to actually recognize certain words or sounds of words. And I have to be real aware of, as I go through my day, making sure I ask the right questions to make sure I'm hearing the information correctly.
Mm-hmm. And so, these problems still affect adults. So many students with dyslexia have poor phonological awareness. They have trouble connecting sounds to print. This then results in slow word perception, a delay in developing instant word reading, and poor spelling. And oftentimes, again, we can see when we look at kids writing and spelling, that they're having trouble making the connections between the speech sounds and the graphemes or the print. So here's Brad, he's in 3rd grade, okay, and he's writing ET phone home. And so we just kind of look at that, we see the P and the M and the N and this confusion, with sounds. So one thing as evaluators that we have to be able to do is count phonemes in words, so pig, ig, 3, sheep, sh, eep, 3. Now, box is one that often confuses people because it's got 3 letters, but it has 4 speech sounds. So b, a, k, so there's 4 speech sounds. And, we'll often see a 1st grade student spell box, B-O-K-S, or even B-O-C-K-S if they're, a little bit, more advanced. So we've got to be able to count phonemes. It's important too not to add a schwa sound, after stop consonants. So Aaron is in 4th grade and his teacher is dictating his spelling words really slowly. So you look at dream there in the middle and you can figure out what she's doing. Dream, cold, So she's adding that schwa sound. So we have to, practice again, pronouncing phonemes correctly, for assessments. So this just shows you a sequence of development in terms of, phonological awareness abilities. And you want to find out exactly, what a child can do and, what they can't do. So rhyming words, easiest to recognize, the two words rhyme, which doesn't rhyme, finish what I say, the word that rhymes. And then the most difficult is production. And so again, finding exactly what, a child can do. So, examples of different phonological awareness tasks. Tell me a word that rhymes with dog. What word is this? Shh, ooh. And you'll be evaluating a little third grade student and you go, shh, ooh, and they say horse. You say, no, listen again. Shh, ooh. And they say soap. It's just very difficult for some kids to understand this blending process. Counting phonemes, segmenting phonemes, tell me each sound you hear in the word bus, deleting phonemes, more difficult, task. So with early reading and spelling, the two most important phonological abilities for reading and spelling are sound blending, which provides the basis for learning phonics, and segmenting, which provides the basis for putting your sounds in order when you're spelling. And so if somebody's having trouble reading nonsense words or spelling nonsense words, you always want to check their sound blending and segmenting, abilities. So easiest to blend compound words, then syllables, then phonemes. And with some students, you actually have to start the evaluation using pictures, just again, to see if they can blend. So you want to figure out exactly, what the student can do. So you start with words with continuous sounds that you can prolong the sound. Start out with 2, 3, then 4 sounds. Have a just short little break at first. Then you want to get to the point you can pause a second between the sounds and they can put the sound together. So you want to figure out exactly what the student can do, because then you want to make a recommendation about, where to start the instruction. So segmenting to just opposite of blending, now we're breaking apart. Tell me the two words, tell me the syllables you hear, tell me the sounds, that you hear. I'll just show you a minute of this video, but she's doing a segmenting task with the first grade student.
My dog barks. This is for my, this is for dog, this is for bark. Okay, now you do one. Push each block forward, say, Dan swims. Okay, we're gonna do it for each word. Ready? Try it again. Here we go.
Okay, so what's funny about that is that, he's already segmenting by phonemes, and she's just trying to get him to, break apart words. And so it wasn't really necessary to go, back to words. The most difficult tasks are phoneme manipulation tasks. And because not only do they involve phonological awareness, but they also involve working memory. You've got to juggle something in your mind, as you're doing these kinds of tasks. Say the sounds in enough backward. And you can see how difficult that is, because it doesn't help to look at the spelling, that's for sure. And so these phoneme manipulation tasks, again, are much more difficult. And they really require adding in working memory and a more detailed analysis of words. And Dr. Kilpatrick has made the point that with some of our older students, they will have mastered blending and segmenting, but you really need to dig into these phoneme manipulation tasks. And you'll still see that they're having difficulty with aspects of phonological awareness. So we want to think about the level of development, difficulty level of the tasks, easier to identify than produce rhymes, easier to hear the first sound than the last, toughest is the vowel sound, easiest to work with compound words, syllables, and phonemes, easiest to work with blending and segmenting in our phoneme manipulation tasks, then are more difficult. So, orthography has really been ignored. I've actually, been thinking about this for a long time. I mean, with some of our kids with dyslexia, it's just, how can this be a phonological processing problem when a student spells words exactly the way, that they sound? So Gary's in 5th grade, and we look at his spellings here, fantastic, amazing, colossal. I love this one. Energy efficient, isn't that great? Energy efficient, impervious, healthy, glorious. And when he writes his story, then too, you see that again, I think they're spelled, like they sound. People, P-E-P-O-L. So this was one of his stories in 5th grade. And we look at that last line down there. She called the police because the man behind turned on his high beams again and again, again and again. Now you can see he spells again 4 different ways. You also see he makes BD reversals still. He doesn't know because is one word. He makes it 2 words. But what was sort of cute about Gary was he finally did learn how to spell the police. And every day, no matter what he wrote, the police came into the story. Even his math problems were 27 police plus 35 police. Or he said, I'm so happy. He said, I know how to spell one word.
We'll say this is one writing. So I'm writing, this kid peeks over from the side. I kind of do this. So you can see how horrible my spelling was. My letters, they were huge. And I would look over at the other kids and I would see that their writing was very neat under control. And I would have my handwriting. I kind of want to hide it. Spencer, in your handwriting, did you have a choice not to use cursive? Did you always have to use cursive, or could you? When my printing is as bad as my cursive. But you're comfortable. Yeah, I feel more comfortable with printing. I can read it better too. So multiplication was extremely hard for me. Just like spelling, I felt, what is this doing to me? Do you have it now? What? Multiplication, do you understand it now? Yes, I have a better understanding of it. And I'll show you how to do it. It's 25 backwards after that.
This way, why do you think that is?
Probably just, again, my handwriting errors. One big soppy letters.
It's just a little hard to remember which way to put it.
But then see, at first they thought that it was only a physical problem. Nothing like what it is, really. What is it? It's learning. I can't spell, I can't write right. I'd make a good doctor. We'll say this.
Anyway, so, again, you just see these problems with spelling. We look at June here, who's in 6th grade. Look at number 18 there, water, W-H-O-T-R. Number 14, with, W-H-I-T-H. Number 21, once, W-U-N-S. And so really using, sounds. And then you look at the writing samples test here. And look at girl, G-U-R-L-L, girl, right? Flashlight, anyway, dog is digging. So we still see, 6th grade BD reversals. So this was kind of funny. This was in the store, but, this item's reduced due to the misspelling of the word bird. Well, that's pretty funny. That had to be one of our students with dyslexia, but you had a whole row of Britpots. Brian is 16 years old. Look at suggestion up there on the top right. Suggestion. This is not a problem with sounds. So we got phonology, the sounds of the language, orthography, the marks of a writing system, including the spelling patterns, and dyslexia can really be caused by both. And sometimes what happens is it starts out as a problem with phonology and then becomes, a weakness, in orthography. So sequencing the sounds in order requires phonological processing, particularly phonemic segmentation. Recalling the visual elements of words requires orthographic processing. So this is critical for those letter sequences you can't sound out, as well as recalling the irregular part, of exception words, or irregular words. English has a complex relationship between phonology and orthography. So here we have your tie and my tie. And this was kind of funny. This is in a shop in Florida, but that's pretty cute. Is my tie on straight? And one of my friends just sent me this t-shirt from the Phoenix airport. Taco cat spelled backwards is taco cat. What's funny about it is look at the picture there, the cat inside the taco. All right. Anyway, so problems in phonology and orthography affect spelling, differently. So these are just kind of some examples, confusions of sounds, with phonology and with orthography. Kind of the main thing to watch for is they're going to spell words the way they sound, really not the way they look. And so that's kind of the main thing, to watch for. So how does orthography affect reading, affect trouble remembering sight words, sounding out words after many exposures? You'll be working with a second grade student and they're sounding out the word it. And you think to yourself, how can they still be sounding out it? I mean, how many times have they, seen that word? Confusion of similar looking letters and words, slow word perception, slow reading rate. When we look at how orthography affects, spelling, trouble learning how to form the letters, reversals that continue past the age of 7, trouble copying. And again, this is the main one, spelling words the way they sound, not the way they look. Spelling the same word inconsistently, violating rules, of English spelling, and poor spelling into adulthood. So English is a very hard language to learn to read and spell. This coffee cup kind of says it, I think. English can be weird. It can be understood through tough, thorough, thought and though. So we've got orthography, writing system of a language. You've got orthographic processing, brain's ability to recall letter orientation, spelling patterns, words with accuracy and automaticity. We've got orthographic knowledge, which is your stored information about spoken language. So capital letters, spelling patterns, punctuation rules. Orthographic image, recalling individual letters, words, and word parts. So Ambrose Bierce said that it's really the science of spelling by the eye instead of the ear. And so, if we look at rain and rain, how do you know which one is spelled correctly? And soap, both says soap, they both say rain. And so in this case, you have to use your eyes and have to have seen it enough time, which one, is correct. Now you can sound it out, but that's not sufficient, for identifying the correct spelling. So a recent meta-analysis has demonstrated that orthographic processing is also a linguistic risk factor for dyslexia, that individuals with dyslexia have a deficit in orthographic knowledge that's as large of that as phonological awareness and, rapid automatized naming. So saw this car, at Starbucks. I thought, well, that's pretty funny, really. So this is a Lexus with, that license plate. That's pretty funny. But I've only seen like 3 cases of this ever. This was a 3rd grade student. She did total mirror writing. We had one college student, he took all his notes backwards. And he could make himself write forward, but took 3 times longer. So I was at a conference a while ago and I was talking about this. And at the break, this woman comes up to me and she says, I want to show you what I can do. Okay, so she took 2 pens and with her hand and she wrote simultaneously forward and backward at the exact same time. When she got to the end spelling, the periods are exactly at the same time. I thought, wow, Yeah, that's really amazing. But she says, now as an adult, I only have trouble with speed and spelling. And, again, that's what we're going to see in our adults with dyslexia. So there's been a lot of information about rapid automatized naming and how it is a linguistic risk factor, for dyslexia. So here we've got Danny again.
Oh, go ahead. And Mark? And Mark, get set, go. 64792467292979429 Great job. All right. Okay. All right. Oh, you just got 2 more. I think you're done. Then you have to do your little writing and then you're done. Okay.
These are coming out great.
Yeah. Here you go. Ready? Start here.
Oh boy. All right. So RAND test, what did they measure? Obviously, part of it's attention, name and discriminate among the symbols, retrieve verbal labels rapidly, articulate words rapidly. And so what we know, RAND letters and numbers are the strongest predictors of reading and spelling. But of course, we have to use colors and objects with younger children where the letters and numbers aren't automatized yet. RAND is distinct from phonological awareness. Contribution is larger for younger readers and those with more severe reading disabilities. And it's the pause time that is correlated with reading accuracy, fluency, not articulation time. Now, again, these are results from group studies. And so certainly in some cases, it would be speed of articulation, but it's just, that pause time. So RAN is a good predictor of irregular word reading, better than predicting nonsense word reading, and it's highly related to speeded measures of reading than accuracy. So when you see a student has slow RAN scores, you want to be concerned about and check out their reading rate. So a friend of mine sent this the other day about his daughter, and he said that, the school had just tested hers, and should he be concerned? It's so sort of interesting, you look at this rapid object naming below the first percentile, rapid letter naming below the second percentile. So yes, you should be concerned. And, but one thing that's kind of interesting here, the percentile rank on blending non-words is 63, blending words is 16. Now, you'd expect those to be similar. So kind of made me wonder about, maybe it's attention, because it might be attention, more than, but I think the point is that we do need to be concerned, when we see scores like this. So Dr. Martha Dankla is the person who really started the RAN tests. Whoopsie. Okay.
I assume that you've heard about the rapid naming tests from other people, and for other reasons, I'm going to give you a little bit of the history of it. It actually was an example of beginner's luck that I constructed this test. I had trained with Dr. Norman Geschwind, who was a great professor of behavioral neurology, and he had told us about the exciting disconnection syndrome, in which a person who has lost the ability to get visual information directly into the left side of the brain and has lost the corpus callosum, the big connecting band between the 2 sides of the brain, therefore has a kind of a disconnection of anything that's purely visual from some verbal equivalent. And I thought, well, maybe that's something I should look for in little children. So I looked, first of all, for kindergartners who couldn't name their colors yet. I didn't find very many of those. I did very rarely find a child who couldn't name colors at all, which Geschwind had led me to think of as possibly an indication that the connections were not covered with this insulating material of myelin, and so the child wouldn't be able to name the colors. But what I then thought of was something else I'd gotten in medical school, which was a little bedside chart with 5 colors printed on it, which was used for recovery from head injury. And they said, let's take something really, really primitive, like the names of colors. You know, you can even learn the names of colors in Spanish if you have a lot of Spanish-speaking patients. And you would stand there at the bedside and see whether on Monday they took a minute to say 50 colors, and on Wednesday they took 40 seconds to name 50 colors on this chart. So I said, well, maybe what I should do is ask the children to name colors rapidly, not for purposes of recovery from head injury in this case, but just because perhaps the speed with which they can retrieve the color names would be a delicate indicator. And generally speaking, in translating from adult neurology to child test construction, you have to go more subtle, because the developmental things are not as glaring as the adult acquired injuries, thank goodness. But the paradigm was simply to see whether you could illustrate the efficiency of the see it, say it circuit. And then when I started to work with Rita Rudell, she added, let's have a card with 5 objects on it, which she took from the 4-year-old vocabulary of the Stanford Binet at that time, thinking that if you were starting with 5-year-olds, you wanted to start with vocabulary that was from 4-year-old level, and then the letters and then the numbers. And the basic idea still stands today, which is you're trying to see how robust that highway is, so to speak, between I see something and I say something, which at the very simplistic level is what you have to do when you begin to learn reading. You're always either responding with a unit that we call a phonetic equivalent, or you're responding with a whole word. So whether you're doing sight words or you're doing a letter and its sound or a letter and its name, you are still neurologically traveling down the same circuitry of see it, say it. And we're on the brink of being able to actually see that circuit with some of the methods that we have with magnetic resonance imaging. Not just the functional imaging, but actually the physically concrete visualization of white matter using something called the diffusion tensor imaging. So pretty soon we may actually be able to show a photograph of this see it, say it circuitry.
So I think, you know, again, the visual verbal highway there, and then there's disruption, you know, in this circuit. And it's really the pause time between the eyes seeing and the mouth responding. I think Ella kind of captured this in an evaluation for dyslexia. She says, I have to read out loud, because if I don't understand anything I'm reading. But then when I try to read out loud, I look at the word, I know the word, I know how to say it, except I can't get it to come out of my mouth. And so again, I think that's just the real disruption there in the see it, say it circuit. So processing speed tests are also related to dyslexia. They can be related to attention, slow RAND, poor orthography, trouble with visual tracking. And it's kind of interesting because these processing speed tests also are related to, you know, basic math skills. So basic reading skills and, you know, basic math skills. Working memory is another area where if students have difficulty, they'll many times struggle in terms of reading, you know, and spelling. Visual verbal paired associate learning. Okay, so this is associative learning specific to creating the mappings between the letters, you know, and the sounds. So learning the mappings between the orthography and phonology is critical for learning to read. Operates at numerous levels, including the process of learning letter sound correspondences. The learning of mappings at the level of single letters, letter groups, and whole words when acquiring a word recognition system. And so I think the concept of orthographic mapping really captures this. Process readers use to store written words for immediate, effortless retrieval. Means by which readers turn unfamiliar written words into familiar, instantaneously accessible sight words. So the starting point is forming the connections between the phonemes and the graphemes. and it maps down to man. And what we see is that with typically developing readers, they need to see a word only, 1 to 4 times to retain it. The sight of the word triggers recognition, sound, and meaning. But with our students with dyslexia, this process is really, really slow. And so lots of times they need 20, 30, 40, 50 exposures before the word becomes automatized and becomes a sight word. And so I think with lots of our kids with dyslexia, this is sort of the uh, difficulty too, is that they're so slow in terms of this orthographic, mapping process, and getting words stored as sight words, for instantaneous recognition. So Marianne Wolf said, the history of dyslexia research, heterogeneity of our dyslexic children, complexity of the reading process argue against any a single factor, 2-factor, even a 3-factor explanation. And I think all the time we're learning, more and more about the correlates, of reading failure. So 2 concepts about dyslexia are unexpected reading difficulty and expected reading difficulty. So unexpected reading difficulty is really the discrepancy model where reading performance is below what's predicted by someone's intelligence test score, oral language, their math score, and the difficulty is, unexpected. So Dr. Shaywitz said, dyslexic children and adults struggle to read fluently, spell words correctly, learn a second language. These difficulties have no connection to their overall intelligence. In fact, dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty in reading in an individual who has the intelligence to be a much better reader. While people with dyslexia are slow readers, they're often paradoxically fast and creative thinkers with, strong reasoning abilities. And then she has her sea of strength model of dyslexia, where there's a specific problem in reading words, but it's often surrounded, by strengths in other areas. So have you ever heard someone say you have to have average or above intelligence, to have dyslexia? And, since it's a neurobiological difference, it can affect anyone of any level of intelligence. And these linguistic processing risk factors often lower the obtained IQ score. And when students with dyslexia, over the years, they spend limited time reading, which affects then their development of vocabulary, knowledge, etc. And so, we see declines in terms of, verbal scores, on tests because, they're not, avid readers in many situations. So Dr. Torgerson said children should be able to comprehend or construct the meaning of what's being read at a level consistent with their general verbal ability. And so verbal ability then is kind of the predictor of, how well somebody should be reading. So this is Alan in 3rd grade on WJ writing samples, but it says this woman is a queen. Write a sentence that tells what this man is. And he wrote the mom is thin. Now, if you just looked at that, you think, what's going on? But, this is what he said when he wrote that. He says, a man's a king. Uh-oh, hard words. Don't know how to spell those words. Man is rich. Another hard word. Don't know how to spell rich. What do I know how to spell? I can spell mom and dad. The mom's a queen. Oh, I don't know how to spell queen. What do I know how to spell thin? Oh, I can spell thin. So here we have a very large discrepancy between oral language reasoning and this boy's, ability to spell. So, it's interesting when you kind of look back about ability achievement discrepancies, they really emerged back in the 1930s. In Monroe's book on children who cannot read, where she had a reading index there that was based on the student's age, mental age, and their arithmetic computation. And that was then compared to reading to see how big the discrepancy was to determine how severe essentially the reading disability was. Says it seems we are measuring a discrepancy between reading and other accomplishments, which may occur in either direction at any intellectual level. Reading defects may occur at any intellectual from very superior to very inferior, as measured, by intelligence tests. So the expected reading difficulty, this is referred to oftentimes as a consistency model. It's when reading, spelling, performance are in line with the linguistic risk factors. So if you have a problem, poor phonological awareness, it predicts you're going to struggle with phonics. If you've got slow, rapid automatized naming, it predicts you're going to have a slow reading rate. And so there's consistency between the linguistic risk factor and the low reading performance. So we're coming to recognize deficiencies in certain cognitive processes are indicators of learning disabilities. They predict, therefore result in expected underachievement. And so again, we've got these two different concepts, and they both can be useful in dyslexia evaluations and thinking about, is it unexpected compared to other abilities? And oftentimes the person will have intact performance in, areas like math or science. Is there consistency between the linguistic risk factors and the poor decoding, spelling, slow reading rate, et cetera? And so both of these concepts, are of interest in a dyslexia evaluation. So one thing I did include in your handout is a dyslexia profile that we made, several years ago that just provides a way to organize data regarding dyslexia, and it can be used with any tests and highlights kind of both strengths and weaknesses. So that's something, you can download, you might find useful. But we have these again sort of 4 areas, of importance. So the primary reading, spelling difficulties, the linguistic risk factors, ability to learn when reading's not required, unexpectedness, and then, any at-risk indicators. So it's like here, here's Isabel, and she's in 7th grade. We look at her Woodcock-Johnson scores here. It's just like all these areas are really, really low, really, really low. And, then you look at her writing. The bird is feeding his babies, right? The BRID, the BRID. I think she was the one that did those pots. Anyway, we look at her spelling, look at camp, look at 21 down there. Look at once. OUICEN. So again, we have some students that are, very far behind. So with this profile or any dyslexia assessment, you want to look at the primary areas, how they impact the secondary areas of reading comprehension and written expression. Are there any linguistic risk factors? How do they do on tests when ability to learn when reading, they don't have to read? And any at-risk indicators, including family history, early speech and language, early interventions that the student, has had. And so taking all those, into consideration. So we want to think about when identifying dyslexia that there's weaknesses in phonics, sight word identification, reading fluency, and written spelling. There's weaknesses in one or more linguistic processing risk factor. There's strengths in other areas such as oral language, reasoning, math, knowledge. And then also thinking a bit about the concepts of both unexpected and expected, reading difficulty. So Cruikshank said back in 1977, diagnosis must take second place to instruction, must be made a tool of instruction, not an end in itself. And so again, our purpose for evaluation is to lead, to appropriate instruction for our students. So we want to make sure students who struggle with reading get comprehensive evaluations. These evaluations need to explain why the student is struggling with reading. Where are they developmentally? What type of instruction is needed at this point in time to help them? Is it phonological awareness, phonics, structural analysis, fluency, spelling, maybe several of these areas? So, Dr. Woodcock said at one point that the primary purpose for testing should be to find out more about the problem, not just to get a score. And so what we're really trying to do is find out, more about the problem. But Howard Gardner, also said, we also want to find out more about the factors that'll facilitate performance. He said, we shouldn't ask how smart you are, but instead, how are you smart? And so we want to be thinking about in a dyslexia evaluation, really documenting, the students' strengths and identifying, what is it that they do well, what's easy for them. So Stanger and Donahue said back in 1937, if these tests will give us a basis from which we can start to understand a child's difficulties, they'll have justified the time spent on them. Anything which helps educators or parents to understand any phase of development or lack of development is of immeasurable value. And we think back, that's 1937. And when you think about the assessment tools we have today, they can really help us understand a child's difficulties and explain, and then kind of know what to do about it, and how do we help essentially. So I'm just about to finish up here, but I just want to show you, this is kind of funny because this is one of my favorite workshop evaluation comments. I think you'll think this is pretty funny too. Personal, your appearance is nice, yet shoes that are in the same blue-green shade as your dress might be better, or black shoes with darker hoses. Okay, so, that's pretty funny, but I saw my mother in Chicago that night and I said, Mom, what do you think about these shoes? Oh, Nancy, darker shoes would be better. But anyway, I thought, okay, this is one reason I love Zoom, because you can't see my shoes, okay? You can't see my shoes. Anyway, all right. So I thank you for all that you all do in terms of, identifying, helping students with dyslexia, and, making sure that they get the kind of, help that we need. And in our next webinar, we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you face, when you're trying to evaluate, students, for dyslexia. So Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, please don't go anywhere. We are going to have a Q&A with Dr. Mather as soon as I get through the next few slides pretty quickly. I'm going to try to get to some of the questions that you've submitted in the Q&A. Obviously, I can't get to all of them, but we really do want to get to those questions. We do have a new test coming out in 2023. I know a lot of you have already asked about it in the chat, and I just wanted to tell you, if you would like to join the mailing list, Laura has put in the chat right now. If you want to join the mailing list, it will be coming out in 2023. Pre-sales will begin in February. It is the tests of dyslexia, and this assessment is very comprehensive, including a screener, dyslexia interventions and recommendations, rating scales, and then early version and comprehensive version. Also, you can go ahead to the next slide, Dr. Mather. If you need assessment help at any time deciding on assessments, we do have our assessment consultants available with their contact information. You will get this when you receive the link for the slides of the handouts. Also, we have, next slide, please. We have Ann Rogers and myself, or Ann Rogers and I am a business development manager. I focus on general education counselors, reading specialists, and special education teachers, and she focuses on large healthcare and other non-school accounts. And that's just the map telling you where the assessment consultants are. You can keep going. We are offering this 10% off WPS assessments. And it is, the code is WPSXDC. That will be in your handouts, and that's good for until November 21st. We have plenty of resources. I just want you to know, someone just asked in the chat box if they can be a data collector, a field person. So we are always looking for people. So if you would check out any of these resources, we have our online evaluation system, our video resources, which is where the recording of this webinar will be. You'll also get a video link. The content hub, we have so much content on dyslexia now. We have content on reading, assessment in general. We have a telepractice page and also a YouTube channel that has a ton of resources on it as well. If you want to contact us by email, you can always go ahead onto the website and fill out one of those forms. And if a question doesn't, you can go ahead and we'll go into the, no, keep going. You're good. We're going to go into the Q&A so you can turn the PowerPoint off. If you have a question that hasn't been answered today, you can submit an email to consult@wpspublish.com. Anybody who wants to join the mailing list, I see that people are putting their emails in the chat box. Please click on the link that says join the Todd mailing list for updates on release and pre-sale. One of the things that we are trying really hard to help people understand, and we're going to get ready to get into the Q&A, is that we are trying to promote a team approach to looking at dyslexia and dyslexia assessment. And that includes reading specialists, educational diagnosticians, speech language pathologists, school psychologists, teachers from the classroom, etc. And so I know we had a lot of questions, Dr. Mather, on that question, who is qualified to do this type of assessment? So I just want to put it out there. People who have knowledge of reading and are trained in assessment should be working together to do this. And I know that Todd offers a screener, it offers the rating scales, and it offers this comprehensive, so there's room for everybody to be involved, and taking into account who has rapport with the child is important as well. So let's get to the Q&A. Oh, don't forget to join us on the next webinar, December 7th, for challenges in assessing dyslexia, where we will get more into those challenges. And I want to get to the question and answers there. So in what way is dyslexia evaluation similar to and different from a specific learning disability, Dr. Mather?
Well, a specific learning disability evaluation is a much broader concept. I mean, so dyslexia is the most common specific learning disability, and so it would be part of, but specific learning disability evaluation would also be kids with math problems and written language problems, and so it wouldn't just, be dyslexia. So it's a broader, category. But with dyslexia being the most common, learning disability in that category.
Okay. And how do you distinguish between limited visual spatial processing and orthographic processing? This was something that came up in the chat too.
So, again, orthographic processing is dealing with the symbol system. So like the spelling patterns, the symbols, usually with visual spatial, sometimes it includes three-dimensional thinking, but it's more with objects and shapes and rotations. And so it's more of, manipulating in space and seeing space and organizing space. And so just, more related to perhaps something like geometry, not reading per se.
Gotcha. So how early do you think is too early to diagnose dyslexia?
The thing is, you really can't diagnose dyslexia until someone's exposed to reading and to letters and things like that. And so you could identify a 3 or 4 year old at risk for reading disability because both parents have dyslexia and they're having trouble with articulation and speech sounds, and they're at risk. So the important thing with young children is early intervention, is so identifying them as at risk for reading failure, not necessarily saying they have dyslexia yet. And so that may be a diagnosis that comes in first grade or second grade, but making sure the earlier we intervene, the better in terms of helping kids with dyslexia. So we want to get in there and intervene before they experience reading failure, before they know they're going to
Right.
have trouble learning to read. So
that early intervention is key.
Yeah.
So what are the key consideration when the client is being assessed for dyslexia, but also gifted?
I mean, that gets a little bit complicated just because dyslexia can affect your scores on intelligence tests because of, not reading as much. And so your vocabulary and knowledge. And so you may not look so gifted in those areas, particularly the older, that you get. So you kind of have to take in, those considerations. And then it kind of becomes a question of, also gifted, in what, so maybe they're really gifted in reasoning or gifted in visual spatial thinking or, other things. But, there are twice, that's something we'll talk about next time, are these twice exceptional students with dyslexia. It gets challenging sometimes because sometimes too, their scores will be in the average range. And so then it looks like they don't have a problem when their reading is so far below their intelligence, so.
Okay. One of the things that comes up over and over again is this question about, is dyslexia more than having difficulty reading? How would you comment on that?
Well, the thing is, it's also a problem, with spelling and with automaticity. But lots of times what ends up happening with dyslexia too is, there's going to be comorbid kinds of things like because of the dyslexia, there's high comorbidity with anxiety. There's problems with self-esteem. And there's, times when they interview adults with dyslexia and they say that their number one problem now isn't reading, it's self-esteem. It's like struggling so much in school has such an impact on their self-esteem and self-image that they still as adults struggle with that. And so they would be sort of byproducts of the dyslexia that, and again, that's why we need the early intervention, and we need to help kids understand when they have dyslexia, what it is and how we can help them.
So when you talked about comorbid conditions and someone asked the question, if a child has a language disorder, would you still diagnose dyslexia? This person's read conflicting opinions in the literature and heard conflicting opinions in professional development and from colleagues. So they wanted to find out what you thought about that.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's high comorbidity between dyslexia and language disorders. The 30 to 40% of kids with dyslexia also have language disorders. And so you can definitely diagnose both. But that's something we'll talk a little bit about next time too, is it becomes more complicated. It becomes more complicated when the person also has, you don't have the unexpectedness because reading's low and language is low. And so it makes it more difficult. But many of our students that start out with speech and language difficulties, preschool, kindergarten, end up with reading problems. And so there's high comorbidity. So
okay. And how about mathematics? Is that should that be assessed as part of a dyslexia evaluation?
Lots of times with the dyslexia evaluation, as I mentioned too, you really want to look at, strengths as well. And so you want to see, does the student have strengths in math? Because again, that kind of shows you it's not everything, it's specific to reading and it's unexpected because typically reading and math, are more similar. So there's lots of times you would include math in a dyslexia evaluation just to demonstrate it's not everything. They're doing quite well in math. And also sometimes to use as a reason for don't retain this student. The student is at grade level in terms of mathematics, and so retention is not going to do any good.
Right. So one of the things this is an age-old question, and this is why I think, in my personal opinion, we sometimes miss the mark. People don't know, but I was a school psychologist for 17 years before working with WPS. And sometimes in schools, we miss the mark of evaluating dyslexia for a lot of different reasons, but sometimes it's because people can't decide, well, is assessing for dyslexia using a test like the TOD, is it an achievement measure or is it a processing measure? And they're struggling to figure out who gives it and what type of measure it is. And as I said before, we have to work together as a team. But Dr. Mather, will you address that question, achievement versus processing? And is it a combination of both?
Well, I mean, the thing is we all know there's, a big overlap between achievement tests and intelligence tests in terms of what they're measuring, So you might have an oral vocabulary on achievement test, you might have an oral vocabulary on intelligence test. I mean, so there's overlap, in terms of, what's being measured. But, traditionally, there would be pieces of the TOD that would be very appropriate, and that certain people like speech language pathologists would be very interested in, in all the linguistic risk factors and sort of adding that, piece in. Reading specialists are going to be really, interested in all the reading and spelling tests. And school psychologists are going to be, interested in the processing factors, in the reasoning and the vocabulary and, all that. And so I think, Stephanie, the point you're making is very important, that we really have to get to a place where we're all working together and sharing our knowledge and not seeing things as territorial when, well, if you can give it, I can't, or what, but there's, pieces. It's like, a classroom teacher could give the rating scales to a parent, bring that information to a team then who talks about so again, I think part of our goal is to get people, sharing knowledge and working together.
Yes, as we're all here to help
Yeah.
the children and even adults with dyslexia. So somebody had asked about the age range for the TOD, and that's 5 through adulthood. Let's see. It says staff and parents tend to put all the dyslexia focus on standardized test scores. It's challenging to convey that standardized test scores are just one piece of the puzzle. Any advice?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And that's why one thing with the TOD is we also co-normed it with rating scales, so we can get that qualitative information from parents and teachers, and with the older people, the self-rating scales. And as I mentioned to you at the beginning too, the importance of risk factors like family history and things like that. And so it's really putting all the pieces of the puzzle together to make it, it's to see if it fits. And so it's, not just standardized test results. It's that plus this, plus this, plus this. And, so.
So one of the really age-old concerns also is that when you're trying to consider whether a student has a disability or not, is what they call those exclusionary factors. And they've changed schools a lot, or, there's just been a lot of other things going on. But even if somebody has all those things going on, they can still have dyslexia, right? So how do you get in there and figure that all out?
Well, and again, that's one of the challenges we'll talk about next time, really, is the challenges when English isn't the first language. Challenges because of COVID. I mean, there's just a lot of challenges, right now, that make it very difficult to determine, why isn't the student reading well? Is it dyslexia, or is it because they missed 2 years of school? And so there's just, a lot of things that make this complicated. It's so nice sometimes when you just get a nice clean case of dyslexia and it's just clear. It's just sort of like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
There's nothing else going on. There's no ADHD. It's just dyslexia. It's and it's so clear. But that doesn't happen all the time, as we all know. It's sometimes
Yeah.
there's just a lot of mud around it trying to figure it out.
And that accentuates the great need that we have as evaluators to make sure that we're not just looking at test scores and that we are looking at a lot of other information when we're collecting that, data to make those determinations. Though I'm going to go with one last question here, and what we will do is we will submit all the questions to a central location, and we'll give them to Dr. Mather so that as she is planning her next presentation, she can take some of those into consideration. Someone is saying that they're confused about, you had talked about how people with a range of intellectual disability, intellectual functioning can also have dyslexia. And someone said that the IDA definition says average to above average intellectual abilities. What do you say about that?
Well, I don't think the IDA says average to above average in its definition, but, it would be like saying only smart people can have ADHD. You got to be average or above to have ADHD, when we have something that's neurobiological, there's no way it just hits certain people, only this group gets it, and so it really, doesn't make much sense. If you look at Jim Rose's report over in England in 2009, they talk about too how it's across the range of intellectual abilities. Now, it might not be your primary concern. You might have a student who has an intellectual disability. You're more concerned about that than the fact they also have comorbid dyslexia. You're more concerned that they develop, self-help skills, language skills, whatever. But, I can think of a case of a student with an intellectual disability, 12 years old, who had dyslexia, and, she couldn't recognize her name even, usually, so unusual. So, and again, I think that's one of the challenges we'll talk about next time too, is you may be operating under a definition that doesn't align with what you think or what you believe to be true. So that's a problem and makes it challenging, So
Yes. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. I'm sorry we're unable to get to everyone's questions. There were 150 plus questions in the Q&A, and there's no way we can get to them. And I know that I don't think everyone can see everyone else's questions. So I apologize that we can't get to them all. But if you join the next webinar, we are going to talk about challenges in dyslexia assessment, which is a lot of the questions centered in that area. So I think that hopefully we'll have the same group on there. Please sign up for the mailing list for the tests of dyslexia. Also, I know that we are going to send you a list of resources. We have several WPS blogs that we would love for you to read, and some informational pages on dyslexia assessment and on reading assessment in general. So we thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Dr. Mather, for presenting.